Talking about section 2 of chapter 22, and it's all about the American worker. And the big idea that we're working off here is that market economies, that is an economy based on free trade, rests on the fundamental principle of individual freedom for consumers. That means if you're like me and you didn't see anything you wanted on Cyber Monday, you didn't buy anything. The robot vacuum looked kind of cool, but not $200 cool. So I exercised my free will as a consumer to not buy anything. Had I seen something I wanted? Maybe. And that's my right, my individual freedom as a consumer. But there's also an individual freedom for producers, right? If makers of said robot vacuum didn't want to make robot vacuum, no one's making them. They don't have to make robot vacuum. They can go back to telling you to sweep with a broom. It's their business if they want to make robot vacuum or not. And then finally, for workers, if you want to get a job, get a job. If you don't, well, things get more complicated, obviously, but it's still your choice. You can choose not to get a job. You can choose to get a job. That's how a market economy works. No one is putting a gun to your head and making you buy, make, or work. And that's something that we value as a country. So, of course, a few terms you'll see: labor union, right to work, a few different political terms. Of course, we'll talk about strikes and boycotts. What rights, what powers do you have as an employee? And of course, there's always the classic question: are labor unions good for American business? Business owners and executives would strongly argue no. Why? Because it drives up the cost of labor, which in essence drives up the cost of production, right? If I have to pay you more to make a cheeseburger, I have to charge more for the cheeseburger. We know what price does to demand, meaning I will sell less cheeseburgers, meaning that the world will be filled with fewer cheeseburgers. If you just look at it from the business standpoint, treating workers good equates to more expensive stuff. But if you look at it from the worker's perspective, again, that's what we're going to focus on today. The labor unions play an important role in the nation's economy and political life. So first off, a labor union. I just want to define it simply. It's an association of workers that are organized. You know, the two basic reasons that workers would organize are better wages and better working conditions. You know, if we had to take this class in a bunker that had no windows, it was underground, it had no ventilation, it'd be pretty miserable. I would probably quit after a year. You guys would find a better school to go to. None of us want to have to take a class 5 levels underground in a bunker with no windows, no ventilation. It just feels depressing to me. We'd want better working conditions. And honestly, we expect to be paid decently for what we do. Now here's the reality. The labor movement is almost something we talk about in past tense, because today only about 14% of the American workforce are involved in a labor union. Whether that's the North Carolina Educators Association, the NCEA, whether that's the Teamsters, whether that's the AFL-CIO, whether that's any other particular type of labor union. It only represents 14% of this country. Okay, so two basic types of unions. You got craft or trade unions. You know, maybe this is the United Auto Workers. That'd be the folks working for Ford, for General Motors, which, by the way, did you notice that General Motors has announced they're going to be laying off thousands of their employees? That announcement was just made yesterday. Thousands of employees are going to be laid off by General Motors, which represents what? Ford, Dodge, and Chrysler, three of the big American automakers. And then finally, industrial unions. So you have craft or trade unions like the Writers Guild. You have industrial unions like the United Auto Workers. But there are also different types of organization. There are local unions. I would imagine there's some type of Henderson County association. There's certainly a Henderson County branch of the North Carolina Association of Educators. There are also national unions. One of the largest labor unions in the country is the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organization. It's a nationwide union. Its history is fascinating. Basically, you have smaller craft unions who were still getting fired, still getting blacklisted, joining together and forming a national arrangement. So what powers do unions have? So, once upon a time, when workers would unionize, they would exercise such a great degree of power, unions became so successful that many would even require closed shops. Closed shops. That means, let's say you want to be a brewer. So you apply for a job at New Belgium. That's your thing, you want to be a brewer. Great. Well, there's a brewers union. There's a craft beer guild. And if you're going to work at New Belgium, and if they are a closed shop, you would have to be a part of that union, meaning you would have to prove your solidarity to even get to walk in the door. Those today are now illegal. So once upon a time, union shops would require workers to join the union after they're being hired. Today you have a choice. I can choose to join the North Carolina Association of Educators, or I can choose not to. That's called a modified union shop, meaning by law, there can be no repercussions for me joining the teachers union. By law, there can be no repercussions for me exercising my right to take a personal day if the union chooses to go on strike. However, there can also be no consequence for me choosing not to participate. And this is where work laws come in. You've heard this term thrown around quite a bit in this course. It's a political term that is often used by Republicans to describe a state, and let me define it for you, that forbids unions from forcing workers to join. Now, it actually goes a little further than that, too. It also prohibits unions from exercising collective bargaining. Now, collective bargaining would be, for example, if you as the students of civics and economics were unhappy with this course, Lauren comes to talk to me about it. And Lauren says, I'm unhappy with this class. I don't like it. You're ugly. Okay. I'm going to say, well, that's too bad, Lauren. I'll tell you what, there's civics being offered on the other wing. You can take that. There's civics offered at Blue Ridge. It's called political science. Okay, you can take that. Bottom line, if you're unhappy, leave. Now, she's never said that, so I'm just picking on her. But if all of you were to come to me and say, you're unhappy with this class, well, then I might be more likely to acquiesce because, well, I've got to keep my job. Ideally, I've got to have students in the room to teach a class. So, in a right-to-work state, you would have no rights to come to me as a group and have that conversation. You couldn't. By law, you could not come to talk to me. I would not sit down with you. I would be within my rights to say, I don't have time to talk to you about that. That's a right-to-work state. Now imagine you're a much larger group. Say you're the entire student body of Henderson County. The student government of Henderson County has decided that the students of Henderson County Public Schools are unhappy with their working conditions. I don't know. I mean, maybe their buildings smell or something. Who knows? Maybe let's call it crumbling infrastructure has led to poor working conditions. Okay. You have no right to talk to me about it. Let's say I'm Bo Caldwell, superintendent. You have no right. That's a right to work state. Does that make sense? Now, the reason I bring that up is, what recourse do you have? What can you do if I'm not willing to talk to you? Now, again, I am theoretically, as representing Bo Caldwell, if the superintendent, exercising his right as a right to work state, refuses collective bargaining rights, meaning you as the students have come to Bo Caldwell and said, we need better buildings to work in, or blah, 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 blah. What's your other recourse if they won't talk? Strike, yes. You can leave. En masse. All students of Henderson County quit. It's kind of extreme, right? So if they won't talk to you, that's the only recourse you have, which is the situation North Carolina is currently in. Since management will not meet with labor, and since management is not required by law to meet with labor, the only recourse North Carolina workers have is to quit. So that's what a right to work state is. Anyway, it is the job of the National Labor Relations Board to regulate labor and working conditions. Okay. Secondly, let's say that you are unhappy with your workplace conditions. Let me unpack collective bargaining, since I've already mentioned it. Collective bargaining is the process by which unions and employers negotiate the conditions of employment. This one's important. So let's say, for example, you go to work at McDonald's, and you tell McDonald's, hey, I'd like to work for you guys, but I'm only available on Saturdays. I don't wake up early on Saturdays, by the way, so I'm going to work from about noon until I'm tired, which is usually around 4. You guys cool with that? Would you hire me at McDonald's if I told you that? No. Only Saturdays, noon to 4. That's when I'm good, because I go out with my friends after that. Am I going to get a job? No. Now, collective bargaining would mean that if all of McDonald's employees came together and negotiated conditions for their hire, there'd be a process. Now, no one would expect McDonald's to go along with the 12 to 4 only on Saturdays. However, there are reasonable requests that can be made. 40 hours per week. Overtime if it exceeds that. Benefits if I'm full-time, required by ACA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Reasonable request that can be made conditional through the collective bargaining process, meaning that we, the McDonald's worker, feel that we deserve a safe and clean working environment. So negotiations, of course, focus on wages. Ultimately, if you're going to work at McDonald's, you want to know, if I'm starting at this, do I have an opportunity to rise? And am I going to be paid a fair and living wage? Did you guys hear about all the Amazon drama? What was the Amazon drama with wages?
Basically, it's a sweatshop and they weren't paying much.
Yeah, so what are they paying now?
Aren't they paying the living wage now?
They are required now, they are paying $15 an hour. Starting out, $15 an hour. Which, yeah, I mean, but when you think about what they have to do in there, it's hard work. So wages, that was something that was fought for, that was negotiated for, and that the workers ultimately won the right. Healthcare. Now, we've also talked about this. If you work in fast food, often those companies will keep you below full time. Why would they keep you below full time? This happened to my mom when she worked at Walmart too.
So they don't have the benefits.
Benefits, so they don't have to provide health care, because by law, if I employ you full time, I have to provide some type of benefits package. And so the loophole that companies have found is, well, I'm just not going to employ you full time. Well, that's not fair to you. Certainly good for them. It's not right, but that's what they're doing. And so workers may approach management, and again, if you're thinking McDonald's or Walmart, you're needing to think about tens of thousands of workers to impact a company like that, to negotiate the idea of health care or even holidays. Ultimately, it comes down to working conditions. Are you happy where you work? For example, there was a rumor about the making of Red Dead Redemption 2 that the workers on the game, the programmers, were unhappy with their working conditions and quit. Now, the rumor was actually put to an end because the folks at Rockstar came out and said, actually, no, we're pretty happy. There was a group they were contracting, like a third-party group they were contracting through that was unhappy that they're no longer affiliated with. Bottom line, the folks were like, yeah, we're good. We're paid well. Our office space is fine. Our hours are okay. Our health care benefits package is good. We enjoy making this video game. Which, by the way, do you know was bigger than Infinity War? Did you guys hear that? That Red Dead Redemption 2 had a bigger opening weekend than any movie, show, or album, or any type of media that has ever been produced? A $975 million opening weekend for a video game. Okay, enough said.
Red Dead's great. Yeah, you gotta play it.
Yeah.
So, all this is nice in theory because ultimately we don't have these rights in North Carolina. That's what makes me grumpy about this process. Perfect world, you hate your job, not just because the people or whatever, but because of something genuine and reasonable. So, you've decided to go through the collective bargaining process. At this point, it's not just you filing a grievance, though that is a right you have, certainly, and we can talk about that later. But you as a group of workers in this certain place, or workers representing even a larger industry like Ingalls workers in general, what can you do? Well, mediation is where the union and company officials would bring a third party. That means they would hire a professional mediator, someone to facilitate the conversation. You can do this on a personal level with your friends. Miss Willingham serves as a mediator all the time for friend drama, but even in the legal sense, mediators do this for a living. And then finally, you may even choose arbitration. And this is very formal. This is actually generally involved in a court of law, in a civil suit, where the workers file a formal grievance in a court of law, and the judge, serving as the arbiter, would make a decision. Okay, so what tools do labor have? Since collective bargaining was taken away from workers in North Carolina, as we are a right-to-work state, the main tool that we have is to go on strike. And so that's why teachers demonstrated their solidarity in the spring by going on strike. Now, we only elected for one day. It was really just a show of power to say, hey, there are millions of us that will shut down schools around the state if you mess with us. Don't make us do it. And, had it come to that, then we would have gone on strike and shut down the schools in the state of North Carolina. Now, that didn't happen here, but it did happen in West Virginia, in Oklahoma, where else? In Arkansas, in a number of other states last spring. It was incredible. States across the South were shut down because these were all right-to-work states, and the only recourse these teachers had were to go on strike. And so it's obviously called a strike or a work stoppage. But there's also boycotts. Let's say you work in an industry and there's a problem with that industry. Maybe it's the way that workers are treated. Maybe it's the cleanliness conditions. Maybe it's health and safety code violations. You just know that there are serious problems, not just at your place, but at all the places. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to tell your friends. Don't buy the meat at Ingalls. Actually, I do buy the meat at Ingles. It's great. But, maybe you saw something I didn't, and you have a problem with that. Okay, so don't buy the meat at Ingles. Boycott. That's something you can do to hurt that business until they have to listen. Now, on the flip side, management is not without their rights. Management can lock out their workers. Maybe you say, Naomi files a grievance with Little Caesars and they decide to go on strike. Little Caesars can say, you know what? We have a stack of applications in the back. You guys go home. We'll find new people. And don't come back until you're willing to work for the conditions that we offer. You take the pay that we're going to offer. You take the hours that we're going to offer. That's the bottom line. Take it or leave it. That's called a lockout. And honestly, that's a powerful tool. Because what are you supposed to do? What can you do in that situation? And this is honestly where a lot of folks hit dead ends. And where a lot of labor movements have to grow much bigger to become effective. And then, of course, in extreme circumstances, the government may step in. And in the history of the labor movement, there have been numerous cases where the National Guard have been called in to labor strikes. And of course, public employees, myself, can join labor unions. We talked about that.